Hey guys, what's going on? Excoundrel here. Today we're going to be looking at a very easy to execute composition in TFT Mobile. It is Rebels. Rebels are, in my opinion, one of the more flexible synergies in TFT, but also one of the easiest to build and execute on. I think Rebels are super strong, but also the fact that they're very new player friendly. They force specific positioning. The whole point of Rebels is that you put them adjacent to each other so that they sort of get a stacking damage bonus as well as a stacking shield. The core champions for most Rebel compositions are Malphite, Sona, Yasuo, Master Yi, Jinx, and then Aurelion Sol. Obviously, you can bring Ziggs in for any of the Rebels. If you can't find Aurelion Sol, you can even bring Ziggs in for him. And Ziggs is also good at building out Rebel Demolitionists also, because the Demolitionists is one of the variations of Rebels that works really well. So let's have a look at the Rebel Blade Master composition. This is basically the primary Rebel composition. This is the sort of stronger version of the Rebel composition that we want to focus on. This relies on you getting a Blade of the Ruined King to turn your Jinx into a Blade Master, and then you stack your Jinx with any kind of item that benefits a ranged attack damage carry. In this specific example, she has Giant Slayer and Red Bluff, but obviously you can put things like Guinsoo's, Infinity Edge, Bloodthirster, loads of different sort of items that benefit Jinx as an individual carry. Items on the carousels that would make this viable composition for you would be things like BF Sword, Recurve Bow, and if you can find a Spatula, of course, that's going to help. Your core items are going to be Blade of the Ruined King for Jinx, but then if you find a Seraphs for Aurelion Sol as well, that's going to give you another damage threat in the late game. Rebel Demolitionists are another variation that would require you to find a Spatula and build a Demolitionist charge. That is with a Spatula and a needlessly large rod. Carousel items that would make this composition viable for you are Tears and needlessly large rods, and you want to use the Ziggs over the Yasuo instead. Now I'm going to go into greater detail over the next 10 minutes about all of the individual compositions and how I build it from early to late game, looking at positioning, looking at itemization and item distribution. So the next 10 minutes are going to be pretty heavy on info, and then at the end we're going to do what we did for the cybernetic video. We're going to talk a little bit about a gameplay where I play a little bit of the early game, a little bit of my mid game, and a little bit of my late game as well. So hopefully this helps you get to grips with Rebels as a composition. So let's talk about early game for Rebels, because I think the Rebel cheat sheet was some of the core best compositions, but you can play just Rebels as well. So I'm going to start off with a core of just Rebels and then talk about what you would do for Blade Masters and what you'd do for Demolitionists. I would say that obviously if you're holding out for a Spatula, sometimes if there's the opening carousel where everybody gets a Spatula, you can go for one of these two comps, but obviously it's not always guaranteed that you're going to get a Spatula. So going for a Blade Master or a Demolitionist comp without a Spatula, usually you just have to default over to straight Rebels. So what I'm going to talk about is if you don't have a Spatula in the early game, this is what the composition would look like. So let's switch over to champions. It's always really good to start to go for 3 Rebels. So 3 Rebels that I always like to start with is Malphite, Ziggs, and Yasuo. More like this. This gives you a 3 Rebel start, and you can essentially position them all around Yasuo, however way you want, usually something like this, over in a corner potentially like this, and Yasuo will get, actually it's better over here, and Yasuo will get, a big shield, and everybody will get some benefits of being in a little cluster like this. So this is a good start for Rebels in general. And obviously you've got the Brawler, the Demolitionist, and the Blade Master here. Now, what I like to do, because it's not always certain that you're going to get to the Spatula, I like to stack Yasuo, because when you play Rebels, you usually like to stack Yasuo in some way, shape, or form. So I like to at least give him something like a GA. GA is a good start for Yasuo. I also quite like to give him something like a Hand of Justice if you can find it. Those are two, this is like a 2 really good item start for a Yasuo in the early game. I like to give him items that would go well on other champions in Rebels. So for instance, these 2 items would work on Jinx. They wouldn't be ideal for Jinx, but they would definitely work. Like GA especially is still a really solid Jinx item. So I'd give Yasuo these in the early game. This would be my first 3 units. And then I usually would add anything. Like I would add anything that is just a 2 cost. I would sometimes maybe add a Sona if we want to go for an extra Rebel here, so we'd get the 4 Rebels. But if you can get the 4 Rebels early on and get a stacked Yasuo, this is like the perfect start. You don't need the Sona. You can have whatever you want. I've had a multitude of champions. So, for instance, I could even go for something like a Blitzcrank to get the Brawler bonus for the Malphite, and you pull them in towards Ziggs or whatever, or you pull them in towards Yasuo specifically with the Brawler bonus. That's perfectly fine. You could have a Vi, for instance. Where is Vi? Over here. Vi would work pretty well. Obviously, the Brawler bonus for Malphite as well, so they get the bonus health. That's a perfectly good start for Rebels. Now let's talk about what we get when we go towards level 5 and 6. So we're at the mid-game now, we're level 5. We are surrounding our mid-game Yasuo with Rebels. We have two options at going to level 6. Either we find the Jinx. So if we find the Jinx, we set up like something like this. Probably something like this. We're still surrounding the Yasuo. We have 6 Rebels on the board, and we have our Jinx ready to go. If we can't find the Jinx, that doesn't matter. We can do this. Take the Jinx off. We can add a Fiora for a Blade Master, so we get 5 Rebels and 3 Blade Masters. We can add a Kayle for a Blade Master, or we can add an Aurelia for a Blade Master. So there's a way that we can play this without getting Jinx. You can use an Aurelia, a Kayle, or a Jinx or Fiora, depending on what you want to do. But let's say the optimum situation is we end up with a Jinx here. So we have the Jinx, and then we have the 6 Rebels. And then we go to level 7. That is when we'd add something like the Kayle to make sure that we get the Blade Masters. If however, we do end up getting the Blade of the Ruined King, we don't actually need to add Kayle in this scenario. We can very easily just add the Blade of the Ruined King to the Jinx. And then either you sell off your Yasuo and replace him with another Yasuo, so you're not aiming to get him to 3-star. You give the Guardian Angel over to the Jinx as well as the Blade of the Ruined King. And then you can add whatever else you want on the Jinx. For instance, a good item would be something like a Giant Slayer, wherever that is. So that would be a pretty solid item to add here. You could add something like a Bloodthirster. If you don't have the GA, that doesn't matter. But that's like the core item for Jinx would be the Blade of the Ruined King. In this scenario, if you don't get the Blade of the Ruined King, perfectly okay. You don't actually need Jinx to have that to make that work. You obviously can just play for a 3-star Yasuo, play the Blade Master composition, or you can do a big switch. So there's lots of different routes you can take at 5 or 6 depending on what you find. I'm going to just go over this again, just to make sure you're aware. Obviously, at level 6, the optimum thing is to have 6 Brawlers. If you don't have Blade of the Ruined King, it's very unlikely, and you don't think you're going to get Blade of the Ruined King, it's not worth trying to play for a Blade Master comp around the Jinx. You can play a Blade Master comp with a Kayle and make it about the Yasuo. You can play it with an Aurelia and make it about the Yasuo, or if you're really desperate, you can play with a Fiora and make it around the Yasuo. So that's a way that you could play this composition and go for a 3-star Yasuo, and he would be your carry champion, and then you'd stack him with an extra item. That'd be something like a Bloodthirster. That would be something like a Bloodthirster. It would be something like an Infinity Edge. It would be something like a a Gunsu's Rage Blade. That's what you do if you don't find the Blade of the Ruined King, okay? If you do find a Blade of the Ruined King, you can get Jinx, focus on getting Jinx to 2-star, and then you can either add extra items to Jinx, so something like a Giant Slayer? Where's the Giant Slayer? Here. Something like a Giant Slayer, for instance, is a good item on her. Red buff is pretty good on her as well. Here. Loads of items that you can add to Jinx. And it's basically anything that looks like it would help an attack damage carry. So Gunsu's. Hand of Justice is fine, if not that particularly optimal. Obviously, a GA is a really fantastic item to give to her as well. So there are two options when it comes to stacking your Jinx. Either you sell your Yasuo, so we sell him, right? And then we bring him back on as a 1-star and hopefully get him to 2-star. Or if you've got 2-star Yasuos, you sell that 2-star Yasuo and you give the items over to the Jinx. Okay? So that's either one way of doing it. Or you keep the items on the Yasuo and you go for him as 3-star and you have Jinx just kind of as a secondary carry. It's very flexible what you can do from this point forward. The other way that you can play this, so let's say that you never ever get a let's say that you never ever get a Blade of the Ruined King. You still have the Yasuo with these items on. What you can do in this scenario is you can sell the Yasuo. You can give the attack damage items over to your Master Yi and get him to at least 2-star. And then if you find, and this is only if you find an Aurelian Soul, you add the Aurelian Soul in, and then you stack the Aurelian Soul with items like a Seraphs, where is it? With items like a Seraphs, with a Morellonomicon, with a Hextech Gunblade, for instance. Those are the kind of items that you could stack on him. A Jeweled Gauntlet is perfectly fine as well. So that's what you would do in that scenario. If you end up not being able to find a Blade of the Ruined King, that's what you do in this scenario. But let's say that we are playing this as if we're playing a proper Blade Master comp. So let's say that we do find the Blade of the Ruined King, like this, and it goes on to Jinx, for instance, and then we're going to give her whatever else items, and we do indeed have the Yasuo still as well. Wherever the Yasuo has gone, here we go. So you still have those items that you put on Yasuo earlier on. So now you've got the 6 Rebels here. Now, Sona is a Mystic, so the obvious addition to this lineup would be a Lulu to get the 2 Mystic. 2 Mystic just gives you some magic resist, which is fantastic. However, if you can't find a Lulu, you can also add a Soraka. Soraka is also fine. I think, in fact, Soraka is more than fine as well. But Lulu is obviously a great addition if you can find the Lulu. And that would give you Mystics and then the 6 Rebels. It makes a very tanky Aurelion Sol, a very tanky Yasuo, who you're trying to get to 3-star. And then you would add whatever you want at the end. I quite like adding a Blaster. So in this situation, we are looking for a Blaster. And the obvious Blaster of choice is Misfortune, because that would give you a Mercenary, it would give you a Blaster, that would make your Jinx really powerful. Whenever you're running a Jinx, you want to have a Blaster to go with her. Now, obviously, Misfortune might not happen, so there are plenty of other blasters that you can consider. Ezreal is pretty good, so Ezreal would give you a blaster to add to the composition. He'd give you a bit of burst damage, but basically you're just looking for any kind of blaster, but the ultimate blaster that you want around this composition that would be Misfortune. And this would give you your positioning. You're giving everything over to the Aurelion Sol here. Now, let's say you weren't stacking the Yasuo and you went for the stack on the Jinx here, for instance. You would put Jinx in the middle because she's one of your most important. If you don't have the stack on the Jinx and you only have the Blade of the Ruined King and not optimal items, then you're going for a stack on the Aurelion Sol, who you really, really, really want to get to 2-star because he's like a primary 2-star. So that's how you play everything from the early game. Lots of decisions that you can make when playing Rebels. There's loads of different ways. The other way that you could play this, for instance, is let's say we sell the Yasuo and we don't have the Blade of the Ruined King here on the Jinx. What we're aiming for here is, if we get rid of these guys, is adding in the Ziggs wherever he's gone. Where's my boy Ziggs gone? There he is. So we're adding in the Ziggs in this scenario, and then we're basically looking to play Demolitionists. So we're going to have the Gangplank over here, and then also we want to add either a Lulu. Again, Lulu is really easy to add with Sona, or again the Soraka, like I said. So it's Lulu or Soraka, but let's just say that we have the Lulu. So lots of legendaries here, and then we obviously have the full Demolitionists going on right now. Then we also want to make sure that our main stack of Aurelion Sol is also a Demolitionist. So we need to give him the Demolitionist item, wherever it is. Why can I can never find the items when I'm looking on this thing? It should be really obvious, but it is not. It looks like a little satchel charge. Am I going crazy, guys? Demolitionist charge. That is not how I remember it looking. Never mind. There we go. So we give the Demolitionist charge over to your Aurelion Sol. You could obviously then you make him really powerful. You don't even need the Gangplank in this scenario. Oh wait, you do. Where's he gone? Gangplank. I swear Ziggs is a Demolitionist, is he not? Oh, right, yeah, because we don't have the... this doesn't count it. So, obviously, you only need 2 Demolitionists. So, if you have the Demolitionist charge in your Aurelion Sol, you don't actually need the Gangplank. You can add whatever you like in that scenario. You could also add a Cho'Gath, for instance. A Cho'Gath actually works really well in these comps in general because he gives you a Brawler. You will have the Demolitionist charge because, obviously, you've given that to your Aurelion Sol. But you don't need Demolitionists to make this composition too good. You don't need the Gangplank either. Gangplank is just a way to really make this composition super late game. But obviously, the Cho'Gath works really nicely as well alongside the Malphite to give yourself the Brawler, a bit more of a tanky frontline. Lots of things you can do with this comp, guys. Lots of things. I know it's quite confusing, but hopefully you'll understand going from early game to mid game to late game. There's lots of different ways you can play this. It really just depends on which items you get and which units you're getting sort of shown the most in the sort of the shop and stuff. Right, we'll go through a little bit of a game and you can see how I played this. So I'm going to go over a game at the different stages again, like I did with the last guide. We're going to look at how I played the early game here. So you can see that in my early game, I've basically got a 2-star Ziggs on the field, as well as a 2-star Xayah, a 2-star Twisted Fate, and a 2-star Jarvan the 4th. Now, as you can see, these don't really make up any kind of real composition. They are just random 2-stars. And I think in the early game, I've talked about it a lot, it is okay to just randomly 2-star your stuff. It is perfectly okay to just have random 2-stars on the field, because they're always going to be good in one way or another. And you can see that I've given my Jav in the 4th the GA, which I would intend to give to the Yasuo or the Jinx later on, and I've actually just added a random recurve bow to the Xayah because she benefits from that, and I'm going to sell her eventually too. At this point, I am collecting rebels. So I'm just collecting any kind of rebels that I can find. For instance, the Master Yi, for instance, the Yasuo, for instance. I'm just looking for random rebels so that I might be able to eventually get into a point where I can use them. You can see that I actually picked up a Yasuo with a tier, which is beautiful because I actually already had a Brawler's Glove on the bench, and that was allow me to create a Hand of Justice for my Yasuo, which is a pretty good item for him. And now, when I find another rebel, for instance, hopefully a Malphite, I can actually just sell the 2-star Jarvan and then give the GA over to my Yasuo, meaning that I can activate the 3 rebel buff, and then I can also give my Yasuo the items that is going to allow him to perform well in the mid game. Okay, so we're jumping now to round 3-3. I have got the Malphite on the field, I've got a Master Yi and a Ziggs, and I'm keeping the Xayah there as well because that's going to give me the Blade Master bonus. So I've got 4 rebels on the field with the Blade Master bonus with a stacked Yasuo. This is a really, really good rebels mid-game composition, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. So I actually am now just primarily searching to econ up. And then, obviously, you can see some spatulas here. Spatula would be absolutely ideal for me in this scenario. And you can see, as long as no one goes for it, I end up getting the spatula. The spatula right here would allow me to go for the Jinx Blade Master composition, which means, obviously, I can get rid of the Xayah pretty easily. And that would allow me to get the full-fledged late-game composition. So I end up getting the spatula, which is really nice. And I end up putting myself in a really good spot. I actually end up finding the Kale as well, so I sell the 1-star Xayah for the Kale. Still keep me the Twisted Fate there. The Twisted Fate would go as soon as I find either a Sona, for instance, or a Jinx. But he's just still sticking around because he's obviously just a random 2-star. But we're in a really good spot right now. We're in a very, very, very good spot. This composition is quite strong right now, and with the Kale on the backline, adding an extra form of carry as well, even with no items, feel pretty comfortable with the way this Blade Master comp has gone into the mid game. So I want to show you the late game build that we've got here. We have a Demolitionist, the 2-star Aurelion Sol, a 3-star Yasuo. We've got the Mystic bonus with the Lulu. We have a Jinx with the Blade of the Ruined King. You know, we unfortunately just got a little bit overwhelmed by Zephyrs in this particular instance, and not much we could do about it here. But I mean, we got to a top 2 position with this build, even though realistically, if I had better itemization, I probably should be looking at a top 1. But the guy that I'm going up against had a very, very strong composition. We're just going to switch over to the other side, mainly to try and counter the Zephyr placements, and we're trying to get Gangplank and Lulu to be the ones sort of being targeted by the Zephyrs. But, you know, I think overall you're seeing kind of the power of this composition as a whole. It's a very, very powerful composition. Very easy to build as well. That's one of the benefits of Rebels, is that you don't need to play Blade Master. You don't need to play Demolitionist. You can just purely play 6 Rebels and play with a Jinx carry, and you know, overall. But in general, it's just a very, very strong build, and I thoroughly recommend that you guys go and check it out. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you enjoyed the guide, please make sure you drop a like and a subscribe. It would really help me out. I'd very much appreciate it. And I'll be producing more TFT gameplay and TFT guides soon, and hopefully streaming some TFT as well. That would be good. See you soon.